Hello, and welcome to another edition of Relatable. I am your host, Stephanie Michele. I am so excited about today for many reasons, but I did not start this morning feeling that way. I woke up tired, and I was feeling a little weary about starting my least favorite process of the day, which is getting ready. I can sometimes get inspired by fashion and what's in my closet, but I never, ever, ever like doing my hair and makeup. I hate it. I wish I had some person to do it because I'm not great at it. I don't have great hair. I have really fine, baby thin hair, that just never does what it's supposed to do. I'm sure women in the audience that have the same kind of thin hair are feeling me right now because you just have to go with what you get. Anyhow, after a few kisses for my dog, who is on the set today, and you'll find out why in a minute, who reminded me that we're both very much morning creatures. He just loves to wake up in the morning. I remembered last night. So last night I went to see Rob Bell. For those of you who don't know who Rob Bell is, here's a little bit about him. He, like me, is from Michigan. Unlike me, he was a pastor of a mega church. He no longer is a pastor, and he may not even identify as a Christian, but he's still a big fan of Jesus and the Bible. My dogs are having a great time right now. Dudes, it's fine. He's an author, a surfer, a father, an inspirational speaker, and entertainer. So what could he had said last night that turned my morning into delight and excitement after waking up super tired? He said two things. He said, everything is meaningless and everything is spiritual. Now before you think, but Stephanie, don't those two things sort of cancel each other out? They don't, but they don't if you kind of sort them in the right way. So it reminded me that I could sort, who cares about my hair if it ends up looking worse than the flock of seagull hairdo that I woke up with after I attempt to fix it? That's meaningless. What I wear is meaningless. Even if I don't nail this monologue, doesn't matter. It's all meaningless. Once you sort through what is meaningless, what is left is all things are spiritual, which inspires me to no end. When I was reminded of that and reflecting on Rob's words from last night, the morning really opened up for me. I looked in my closet for inspiration, and I found this little silver spoon that was my grandmother's. And I don't wear silver a lot, and I don't wear this, but everything sort of started to connect. Last night, Rob was encouraging, his words were encouraging, he was reading from the Bible, and the gist of it was, if all this is meaningless, we might as well eat and drink and be merry. I'm like, okay. And then I found this little spoon, so it just connects, and it reminds me of my quirky and joyful grandmother. And it also reminds me that I get to choose every day if I want to be joyful and lean into that. So seeing, feeling, and experiencing things from a spiritual level is the only sure thing that gets me through hard times. It's a gift that I wish that I could give everyone that I encounter. And yet I know most people don't want the gift. Why? Well, we're gonna explore that question with my guests today, break down last night and talk about the other things that happened and talk about spirituality. I'm also excited today because I'm celebrating the momentum of my team as we've learned to do Skype interviews for the show. So shout out to Beatrice and Elijah that are in the studio right now. We're still learning, guys, so bear with us. There might be some hiccups as we connect with our guests, but hang in there with us. She's Skyping in from Seattle, which also happens to be the home of my favorite family member, Kyle, my nephew. So shout out to Kyle and his wife, Chelsea. So let me share some things about our guest today before we get to call her and get going today. So today's guest is Katie Sturm. Katie has been she's been an active professional ministry for over 25 years. She holds a master's in both theology and interfaith peace building and spent a number of years doing extended postgraduate research in the UK and Ireland and into evangelical identity, fundamentalism, and Jewish-Christian dialogue. She's worked with dozens of international peace building and faith-based nonprofits over the last 20 years and is passionate about building bridges across seemingly impossible divides. She currently hosts a regular spiritual coaching cohort, which I'm a member of, designed for spiritual disenfranchised and spiritual refugees, and meets regularly with people one-on-one around the world to come alongside them in love, encouragement, and support for their spiritual practice. She currently lives in Seattle, like I mentioned, with her husband and daughter. So that's Katie. We're gonna call her in a minute, and we're gonna do this. This is probably the only time you're ever gonna see my cell phone on the set, because you know how I feel about texting, you know, and talking on the phone when people are actually in your presence. So I'm gonna give Katie a call. And thanks, guys, my charming little companions, four-legged companions, for keeping it together during the monologue. It's funny. All right, so let's call Katie. All right, so calling Katie.
Hello, Stephanie.
Hello. There you are. You're in my ear. Do you see me?
I do. You look so cozy.
I know. I took my shoes off for you, Katie. I'm like, there's no guest here. I can just be casual and, you know, comfortable, and be outshined by my dogs because they decided to have some fun right when we started the show today. And we're talking over, but you know, maybe they want to hear about Rob Bell too. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Having a good morning and enjoying my coffee and my Wonder Woman mug, which makes me happy.
Yeah.
So,
I like it. I like it. Well, so you know what we're going to talk about today, and I'm excited to tell you more about last night with Rob Bell. But I always like to give the guest an opportunity to just like clear what's coming up for you. If like there's anything pulling you that you're like, it's kind of distracting and it will pull us from having a good conversation. Is there anything you want to share before we dive into our conversation today?
Actually, I was just writing in order to try and give a little bit of space to it. But I think what I actually really want to say today is the whole cake nonsense. If you know what I'm talking about, this is a spiritual issue, the Supreme Court ruling on the cake artists. And I think what I just want to say is Jesus would have baked a cake. I don't know what kind of cake he would have baked, but I know that Jesus would have baked a cake. And I think it's really important for me to just like state from the outset that this is a spiritual issue, but this again is something where people are being hurt by the church. Yeah. And that's something I'm really passionate about, right? Like about caring for these people who have been hurt. And so I just want to clear the air today and just say, I think Jesus would have baked a cake.
I think he would too. I would think he would too. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Hashtag Jesus would have baked a cake. Let's start that trend. Let's start that trend. No, I agree. Well, so you know that I went to see Rob Bell live last night. And you and I, between the two of us, how many books do you think we've read of his? I'm on my third. How many have you read?
Oh, I think I haven't read one. So
you've read all of them but one?
Almost all of them but one. Yeah. He's one of my favorite authors.
Yeah. I know that I knew of him before, and I don't know what the before was, but I know that I encountered this person's teachings, or him entertaining people, or his preachings, or something. I didn't read any of the books until recently, and it's exciting how that even came about. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the monologue, how like when you open yourself up, like everything's spiritual. Like having somebody that watches this show, shout out to Jeff if he's watching, but Jeff told me about him or reminded me of him, and then I started reading and then watched the documentary, and you and I have had some talks about it, and it's just, it's cool when things kind of connect and start to make sense and put you further on your journey and encourage you. And I like what he's doing. So should I just tell you kind of some of the things that he talked about last night, and let's just talk about it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the surprise guest. So this is really interesting. So Josh Radnor, who is he's the actor from How I Met Your Mother, and among other things, and Ben Lee, who, if you guys are not familiar with Ben Lee, there's a great song called "We're All in This Together," and I'll share a link in the archives of this really happy, positive, cool song. That's the one that I remember of him. But these two are playing together. Like they're a band. They're like playing music together. And Josh just learned how to play guitar, and those were the surprise guests for the evening. So that was kind of cool and delightful and surprising. And the cool thing there is Josh, yeah, like he actually said on stage, he's like, yeah, I just learned how to play guitar. I'm guessing he's in his 40s, and Josh, if you're not, I'm so sorry. You're just mature, and I'm just guessing that. And 40s are cool because I'm in my 40s. But he picked it up, and he's like doing a fantastic job. These guys like were really impressive, so that was very cool. But essentially, he was talking about the wisdom of everything. And Katie, I know you know about that, so I'm going to let you tell people what the wisdom of everything is.
Well, I mean, Rob Bell did a series on his podcast a little while back on wisdom. So if you haven't heard it yet, folks, I recommend you go find his podcast and listen to it. And Josh Radnor is actually on a recent episode. Talking about wisdom as well, but they do a quote session, and man, that quote session rocked me. Josh Radnor pulling the quotes. Good job, buddy. And I think that the phrase that I love that Rob Bell uses is the wisdom after wisdom, which so we think we know it all, and then we learn we don't know it all. Yep. And then all of a sudden we realize that we sort of maybe know something, but what we know isn't nearly as comprehensive as what we think, but it gives us this spaciousness and this capacity to embrace a deeper wisdom and an intuitive wisdom and a wisdom that doesn't always make logical sense, but that when you look at, I love the phrase, the ground of being, that when we rest in that wisdom, in our ground of being, everything starts to make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And so he walked through this wisdom of everything in a couple different ways. One of the most simple and profound was this like idea of light, heavy, light. So you go through some things, you're just kind of experiencing things at a surface level, and then something causes you to have to like experience something on a really heavy level. It could be a health-related thing, a family member, just devastation, any kind of devastation. And then the ability to sort of have that experience, but then go back to another form of light. That's like, you just went to the bottom depths of darkness, and so maybe you can appreciate this light even more. I thought that was really profound, and I never really thought about a pastor's job. And what he talked about, and he was like a young pastor, like in his 20s, having to counsel people older than him or, going through challenging issues. And so he would talk about having, being somewhere with a couple that might be losing their child, and then coming home to dinner to his wife and his 2 children, and, trying to reconcile, like, how is this both happening at the same time? And, I'm like, I can't even imagine, number one, would you feel guilty? Seen somebody going through this real dark stuff and then coming home and this is nothing like what I'm going through right now. Or would you celebrate it more? Who knows? But this idea of yes, don't be afraid to go through the dark stuff, the heavy stuff, because you're going to have a more appreciation for the light on the other side. I could really relate to that and connect to that. It was great.
I think one of the things, right, is we're living. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my seat. We're living in this era of kind of post-deconstructionism, right? And this is one of the reasons why I loved his series on wisdom so much, because we lived in this really flippant common sense era, right? Where it was like, oh, well, this makes sense. And that actually, here's my little nerdy bit coming out, but that stems from the Scottish Enlightenment, which came straight out of Protestantism. And this idea that, well, God makes sense, so the world makes sense, so everything makes sense. And the Scottish Enlightenment was all about common sense and all about everything making sense. And then all of a sudden we hit these world wars and nothing makes sense, right? Millions of people all over the world, mutilating each other. And the horrors of it. And then the Holocaust, you look at the Holocaust and all of a sudden you're just like, none of this makes sense. Yeah. And so all of a sudden you hit deconstructionism, which is that dark place. But one of the challenges that we're facing is that so few people are doing the work of reconstructing worldviews that are meaningful and that are light and that are vibrant and that make sense, because everybody's still kind of trapped in this oh shit, the world fell apart, what are we going to do? And that's where the wisdom after wisdom comes in. That's where that lightness is when we come to a point of being completely and utterly deconstructed, and we're like broken glass all over the ground, and where we allow spirit or God or source or ground of being or flow or whatever you want to call said being or said force in the universe, energy. And when we allow that to take those broken pieces of glass and put them back together in stained glass windows, that's where the art is, and that's where the filtered light comes in, where it's filled with beauty and wonder and meaning.
Yeah, well put, Katie. Well put. What came up for me when you were sharing that is, courage, having courage and curiosity. Yeah, like there's horrible stuff happening, and I hear people say all the time, oh, well, a loving God wouldn't allow that stuff to happen. Well, he gave us free will. Like everything is not in his control. There's people that are affecting things, and yeah, bad stuff happens, but like how you move forward is courage and having curiosity to go, well, and what? And then what? Yes, this happened, but we're still living. I'm still here. People are still around us. There's still birds in the trees. Like bad stuff is happening simultaneously while good stuff is happening all the time. So just focusing on, the bad stuff over here is you're missing out on the other stuff, and we don't get to like go, oh yeah, well, how do we come together and like do more of this? How do we balance that out?
Well, and I think suffering is a much worse fuel than gratitude, right? I mean, like when we think about the things that motivate us, when we think about the things that move us forward, when we think about the things that empower us and bring us deeper in, like leaning in, it's not, suffering is a part of it, but when we just stay in suffering, it's a horrible fuel. It like eats itself. And yet when we can shift from suffering to gratitude, and I'm certainly not grateful for Syria, like heaven help me, I'm not. But when I can have gratitude for what I have, I can say, oh, what do I have to bring to the table? What do I have as, and that becomes a fuel. And I think it's a much more powerful fuel because gratitude taps back into love. As opposed to tapping into pain and heartbreak. And actually on a call I was on last night, someone said, pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. Like, right? We got to push into it. Everybody experiences pain, but what do we do with that? Do we turn it into the fuel of love to move forward, or do we just kind of sit and cry? I'm all about crying. Don't get me wrong. I'm a crier. But.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. But it's like growth, right? We can't have pain, but by the nature of growth, there's going to be pain. Growing pains. Like we have to go through some things, but yes, we get to choose how much suffering goes along with it. How do are we going to allow ourselves to stay in there? And so while you were sharing and talking about gratitude and love, something came up for me. Like I've never asked this question. You and I are going to work out this question together, but do you think that you can have gratitude and love without some lean towards I accept spiritual energy, or there's a spiritual nature around me, I'm spiritual? Like, can you lean towards those things without an openness to just the concept of spirituality? What do you think?
Honestly, I think so. And this is a shout out to my atheist friends out there. Just a shout out of love, because I think gratitude and love are grounded in meaning making. And I think honestly, like, I'm a Christian, I love Jesus, I am a faithful person, I've been in ministry, I believe in spirituality, do not get me wrong. And yet I can also recognize that there are some people for whom those categories, those expressions of meaning are meaningless for them. And so whether they find meaning in science, or whether they find meaning in logic, or whether they find those meaning making elsewhere, I think that it's the meaning making portion where gratitude and love kind of come in, because they're trying to make meaning out of life. And so I think that gratitude and love are actions that are motivated by our meaning making. And often meaning making can be a faith tradition, or it can be a science tradition, or it can be any way in which we try and make sense of the world that we're living in and the bodies we find ourselves in and the environments we find ourselves in. And sometimes people just reject spirituality. Now, I've found also, though, that a lot of the reasons that people reject spirituality is because of trauma, which we talked about talking about. But, that they've rejected it in absolutely the most healthiest and most helpful ways, saying no to a religion that was toxic to them. And I think that that's actually, for those people, they can absolutely have gratitude and love and meaning making, even as they reject those painful, traumatic experiences in spiritual places.
Two things coming up for me on this. We definitely have to dive into what is spiritual trauma and definition and how people experience it. So we'll do that. But I just want to point out, if anybody's watching and they're like, very serious churchgoer, Christian, Jewish, they identify with a religion, and they may have gotten a little terrified in their heart when we just talked about what we just talked about meaning making and shouting out to our atheist friends and giving them love. And I just want to say that, I think it's important to say that we all go through a journey, and we identify at different times with a different part of that journey, or we call ourselves different things. And let's have space for people on their journey, wherever they are and on their momentum. It's not, and maybe that space gets them to where you consider they should be, but let them have the space. I think it's really important, and I think it's connected to the religious trauma. Is people are so hurried to go, this is how you should have your journey, and that's not a spiritual journey, and that's not our human journey either. Those two things do not connect. So I think it's really important to just go ahead.
One of the things I would say, especially to those in my camp, the evangelical camp, and I'm going to shout out to my evangelicals.
We're going to include everybody today.
Just loving on people today. But the first call of Jesus is to follow me. And that is what Stephanie was saying, is a journey. Our first call to Jesus isn't to read the Bible. It's not to have a quiet time. Our first call from Jesus is always to follow him. And we never know where he's going. And that's why we have to just trust in Holy Spirit and trust in God to help us follow. And so I would encourage you, as we talk through these things, which might raise the hairs on the back of your neck, to just remember that we're trying to follow Jesus into weird places and figure out what he's saying in those places, because it promises, or at least in my tradition, it promises that God is with us wherever we go. And so where is God in these places that we have been afraid to tread for so long? So let's go there, staff. Let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. All right. Well, so let's loop back to this concept of religious trauma. Do you have a definition that you think is a good definition? I've seen lots of different things, but let's start somewhere and then we'll talk about it.
I think one of the best kind of working definitions that I have is that spiritual trauma is anything that disrupts a spiritual journey to the point of creating a disruption of shalom. And when I say shalom, I'm talking about not a pax, it's a word in Hebrew that means peace, but it's not just an absence of conflict, because shalom is fullness, it's flourishing, it's vibrance, it's life, it's joy, it's love, it's completeness. It's, there's another word called tamim, which means to be wholehearted and just fully alive, and that is shalom. And so I think that any disruption of a spiritual practice in such a way that it disrupts your shalom is a spiritual trauma. And I mean, we can talk about it. Sometimes it manifests in PTSD. I have seen it manifest as PTSD in people, which is really fascinating. Sometimes it just manifests in people shutting down and walking away. But I think the core thing is that idea of it's such a poignant disruption that it takes them out of shalom and out of that relationship with source, flow, God, Jesus, in such a way that it's severed.
Yeah. And then I would add to that, so then the part two of that, especially if someone was really tight in a religious community and all their family and all their friends and all of their community was a part of that, and then they had this experience that took them out of that, and they have to leave all of those people behind, because those people, like, that's still working for them, like that they still have their comfort in that community, and they can't quite understand why this person now wants to leave. And there's a distance that's now created, and this person that is now experiencing the trauma now has to go through the process of, like, now I'm alone too. Like, I just lost all my people. So that's, you know, that's quite a disruption in someone's life. And heart breaks just thinking about it. But I like the conversation that I have more with people is along this lines of, like, you know, like the comments that they'll say, like, oh, the church is not for me, or like religion is not for me. And it's because somewhere in their story is a part of trauma. Something was said or done onto them that just, you know, interrupted their growth, or their, like you're saying, their peace, their love, and they've thrown out everything, spirituality, everything, God, everything, because of that experience. And that breaks my heart, like, honestly. You know, to think that, you know, they've cut themselves off from whatever you want to call it, you know, we're open to that, God, spirit, whatever. They cut themselves off from that, and then are also feeling, you know, the isolation of losing a community. Yeah, so how do, you know, and I know you have major heart space for this group of people. You know, are there steps, like if someone was listening right now and go, yeah, that's me. I mean, you know, like, I left this all behind and I haven't thought about this in a really long time. Are there some first steps that you would say to someone that could open that door again for them? Or to deal with the trauma, maybe?
So the first thing I think I would say to anyone in that space is that you don't have to go to church to believe in God. And you don't have to belong to an institution to have a faith. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be embedded in an institution in order to have a spiritual practice. And I think the first step would be to just give yourself permission to have a faith again. Mm-hmm. I think so much of what I see, and I mean, I'll be honest, I do know people who did not have spiritual trauma and they just were done, and that is totally, that is their journey, and I want to honor them in that journey. But for those who have really experienced trauma, those I call spiritual refugees or spiritual runaways or the disenfranchised, I think giving yourself permission to actually love the things you love about your faith is one of the first steps to healing. I can remember working with a few people over the last few years who, you know, I do run reconciliation workshops or releasing spiritual trauma workshops, and I'm doing one in Los Angeles soon, so you can.
I'm going to plug it because I know where it's going to be. It happens to be at one of my favorite places in Los Angeles, so we'll definitely talk about it at the end of the show. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll tell you.
I think the first step I've seen be really helpful is just giving yourself permission. And then the second step I would say is that there's a long-standing tradition in most faith traditions of what's called confession. And when I say confession, I don't mean like admitting everything you did was wrong, because I don't think that's an actual confession is. I think actual confession is where we tell our truth and we allow it to be witnessed in a safe place. And so I think that's kind of a really necessary step, is you need to be able to bring your trauma, bring your wounding, pull it out into the light, and have it be witnessed in a safe place. And that's hard to find. So I would encourage you to actually treasure that and be careful of who you share that with, because sometimes people go the opposite direction and share it with everybody and then get re-traumatized all over again. And so those are the first two steps. And then the third step I would say is to dream about a spiritual practice. Like what makes meaning for you? What makes meaning for you on your spiritual journey? Is it prayer? Is it walking in the woods? Is it like going and sitting in the ocean? Is it being on a boat? I don't know. Is it, I mean, for me, it's playing with my daughter sometimes. For me, it's journaling. Oh, I love to write. But those are all the things, like these are all, everything is spiritual, right? Like when we find these things that are meaning making, how do we invite the ground of being, the one who is perfect love, you know, the God of wisdom and revelation, the spirit of all things? Like, how do we invite that into those practices?
Yeah. I love all that, Katie. I think too, you know, I really heard your point about like be careful, like if you're experiencing this change of course, right? And be careful like who you share it with. Because again, there's always going to be people that whatever is not working for you, it's still working for them. So no matter how you communicate it to them, it's going to feel like a threat, and it's going to feel like judgment coming their way, and it's not going to work out, you know, for either party. But there's all kinds of things that we can watch, and you know, we can read and like just kind of get fulfilled and do all the things that you find spirituality in, like be out in nature and then start to say, okay, who can I have these conversations with? You know, it's the cool thing about your journey is it's your journey, and you get to take as much time as you want with it, and be careful with it, or you know, be carefree with it. It's up to you. But there's certainly, you know, I poo-poo the internet a lot, and you know, and all the fast food content, you know, like the top 10 ways to get woke, and you know, articles like that.
To Rob Bell's sermons or podcasts on the internet, it's great.
Yeah,
it's great.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out. I haven't watched a lot of his podcasts, and I'm so going to, and like I hope he gets to come on and spend time with us too, because he's definitely on my dream list right now of like sitting right here, and I have some big questions that I'd love to like just, you know, weigh out with him. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna start listening to it. But yeah, like, you know, seek out these things. And the other thing that that came up for me when you were talking to is I think a lot of people have trauma around, you know, connecting with a person outside of a faith community, and then being told within that faith community that that person's not saved, or they're not good, or they're, you know, they're sinful or whatever. And that's a part of it. And Katie, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you know the Bible very well. Where does it say in the Bible that he poured out on all things? All things.
Well, it says it in two places, actually.
Okay.
The first place it says it is in Joel, in the prophets, where the prophet is talking about what's going to happen in the age to come.
Yeah.
And that's the first place it talks about it. It says God will pour out his spirit on all flesh. And then basically what happens is in the New Testament, so what happens is Jesus is on the cross, and then he dies, and then he's resurrected, and then he goes and appears to people, and he does all these crazy things, and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this? And then he says, I'm going to go. Bye. But I'm not leaving you as orphans. The Holy Spirit I give you, and I'm going to send it to you, so just wait. Hang out and wait. And so they wait, and then the Holy Spirit shows up. So this is an act. And all of a sudden, just weird stuff starts happening, and like people who never knew Jesus are like prophesying, and they're speaking in, or actually the miracle in Acts is a miracle of hearing. And all of a sudden, all these crazy things start happening, and Peter's like, oh my gosh, and he's a fisherman, right? Like he's not a biblical scholar. So it's amazing he pulls this out because he has no knowledge of the Bible. Like he's a fisherman. He hangs out. I mean, like imagine like a trucker down the road being like, oh, I'm just going to preach and I'm going to like have this Bible verse spew out of my mouth. And so Peter just pulls out Joel and he's like, well, the Holy Spirit has fallen on all people. Here we are. And here we are. And that's the beautiful thing of it is it's just like, here's this group of confused people who are trying to follow Jesus, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit shows up and it just pours out everywhere. And it's a hot mess. It's a total hot mess because God's Spirit is everywhere. And God's Spirit is the Spirit that created suns, so it's a little bit hot and a little bit crazy, and it's the Spirit that created the oceans, so it's like it's all these wonderful, beautiful things. So this idea of the Spirit's been poured out on all flesh, and you know, in Christian tradition we talk a lot about the Holy Spirit or Jesus coming to live inside of us, and I think that there is kind of something in that, but I think what that's talking about is how much we're willing to receive, right? Like if the Spirit's being poured out everywhere, and it's like this I mean, it says, Jesus himself says, it's like the sun shines down on the righteous and the wicked. Like, this is grace, right? Grace is gift, 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 gift. Sun shines down, rain shines down. Like, everything is pouring out. Like, there's just an abundance. How much are we willing to take in?
Yeah. And so I take that too, as it's been poured out to everyone, and no one's better off. There's not this list that who's getting saved, or you're better, or, you know, this branch of religion is better. It's like, it's there for everyone. And you know, Katie, I've been like working through this in my head about like the thread that if it's in everyone, that is the thread that connects us. Like, I like tapping into that. I like seeing people kind of connect in a way that it's like, it doesn't matter what you believe right now, like that is in us. And we're equal in that way. And you know, there's beautiful things that can happen when we kind of get on that thread or that wavelength together. And you know, but I personally know, like, not feeling that or not accepting that caused trauma, because I have, you know, friends in the LGBTQ community. I have friends that are, you know, atheists, that are very amazing people, and like to be told by some organization that those people are not good people, or, you know, I shouldn't be talking to them, like that's when they give me so much love and, you know, great things, like that really hurt me personally. And I know that by, you know, talking with other people, that's like a thing too. It's like, you know, it's hard enough to connect, you know, it's like hard enough to find your tribe than to be told by somebody that doesn't have the personal experience with someone in your tribe that they're not your tribe, move on. Yeah, so that's part of it. So let's kind of come back to Rob Bell for a little bit. So, you know, he's controversial. You wouldn't think he would be. I mean, he was so delightful last night. He was so accessible. I mean, the guy entertained and like he's very comical, you know. But read from the Bible. Like, we went to a bar to watch a guy that used to be a pastor tell some jokes and read from the Bible. I mean, it's kind of like amazing. like it's so much is going on. And surprise guest. Yeah, right? Yeah, it's like, yeah, like he's unidentifiable, like that, you know, in many ways, and charming and accessible, and it was a beautiful group of people. I have to say this, like, the most pleasant experience I've ever had standing in the line for the women's bathroom, which is never pleasant. People are, you know, first of all, we're standing in line. The men's, there's no line. Why are we standing in line? You know, this is always ridiculous. But women were so like, you know, like, hey, where are you from? And, you know, are you a fan of Rob Bell? And just like sweet conversations. Everybody was moving really fast, you know. You just knew you were amongst something. Like, there's just good people there. And like, you know, they weren't all Christians or spiritual people or Jewish people. Like, it was just people seeking meaning, if there's like one general thing, right? Really delightful, like great night, like very positive. But then I know there's people in the Christian community, Christian leaders, that call him a heretic. And he's got a whole documentary where journaling, showing this journey. Like, why? Like, well, why do you think that is? Like, why isn't there room for Rob Bell, who's trying to expand the Bible for people and make it accessible?
Well, this has been kind of an exploration over a number of years for me. So I've been listening to Rob Bell since he was a pastor at Mars Hill in Michigan. I fell into his podcast after I read, I think the book I read first was Jesus Wants to Save Christians. And, it was Sex God. Because I was reading
read that one too.
I read all these books on sexuality, and it was Sex God was the first one I read. And I was blown away. And so I started listening avidly to his podcast. And I just was obsessed with him. And I had also already heard about him through his Pneuma videos, which if you haven't seen them, they're really provocative and really beautiful. And we used them in our college ministry when I was a college pastor. And they really just breathed life into a lot of the things we did. But anyway, so I was really familiar with him. And then I got to go see him live in Belfast, and it was his first tour across the UK and Ireland, and this time in Belfast was his first time in Ireland. And I remember we were in this like archaic old cathedral, and Belfast is the place of really serious spiritual battles between Protestants and Catholics, and just a lot of spiritual trauma. I mean, just right and left. I mean, physical trauma. I mean, it just, Belfast and the troubles of the 80s and 90s, like you can look it up online. It's pretty harsh. But here we are in Belfast, in the heart of this city that has been flourishing since the Good Friday Accords, and we're in this old cathedral, and here's this like Protestant pastor coming to talk, and it was just very kind of surreal. And I had driven up from Dublin, and the tour was the Drops Like Stars tour, and it was all about art and meaning and spirituality, and it was beautiful. And I just remember being so overwhelmed with that. And then all of a sudden he releases this book, Love Wins.
Yeah.
And everybody loved him. He was the golden child, right? Until this book dropped.
The cool.
Yeah.
He was the cool Christian. Yeah.
Right. And what's funny is I kind of was sitting there going, have you never listened to his podcast? Like, have you never read his books? Like, because what happens was the book, it wasn't even that the book dropped. It was that this video of the book dropped. And the question, is Gandhi in heaven? He doesn't even answer it in the video. It's just, he says, oh, is Gandhi in heaven? And he just kind of leaves it hanging there for you to think about. And this is just the promo for his book. And then when you actually dive into the book, it's incredible. But before anybody dove into the book, they were busy criticizing him because they thought he had all of a sudden turned into this universalist, and that everything was relative, and he was a pluralist, and like all these things out of everywhere. And you're just kind of sitting there going, like, what book did you read? What book did you read? Yeah. But one of the things in my studies of fundamentalism and U.S. evangelical identity is that one of the things that really started to manifest in the late 20th century, early 21st it's kind of throughout the 20th century, is this us and them mentality. And it's really colored a lot by the Cold War and by fear. And a lot of it has to do with this idea of, if I'm right, like, you have to be wrong. We can't both be right. Or if you're right, then that means I'm wrong, and that means that everything falls apart. And again, it's that, remember how I was talking earlier about how we have all this deconstruction, and no one's willing to put the pieces back together again. And so we have all of these people who have something that makes sense to them, and you throw a wrench in the works, and oh shit, the machine broke down, and the pieces are all over the floor. So instead of thinking like, okay, how do I rebuild this machine? I'm thinking, oh crap, I've got to just put them back together as fast as possible. Yeah. And so instead of actually thinking about how do I put back this machine in a way that it will work, they think about like, well, I'm just going to scream at the wrench. Yeah. I'm just going to scream at the thing that came flying in and broke my machine. Yeah. Instead of doing the hard work of creating a better machine, really. Which is so bizarre for me. So like hearing you say that, and I think you did a great job of, of saying how could this happen, but what comes up for me in all this is like, okay, there's nothing bigger than just going God or spirit, right? And it's so massive and unknown. Like there's so much like good stuff in there, like that can happen when you just go, there's a lot of unknown there, right? So this idea of trying to make God or spirit binary, right or wrong, seems really bizarre to me because it's bigger than that. And the idea that somebody, like you're telling me to stay, some religious leaders are saying stay on your journey, but only stay on your journey if you're like, listen to me and do it this way. And they seem to be like really threatened by having someone be curious about their own journey. And to me, that's like, shouldn't that be a no-brainer? Like, how do you, the definition of being a journeyer is being curious and going to places you've never gone before. And that's how your faith grows. Like, faith by definition is believing in the unknown. Like, it's bizarre to me that would be frowned upon. I get it, because I feel like, with everything that's going on in our country, and we do talk a lot about binary subjects, and we've talked about it on the show, left, right, Republican, Democrat, gay, straight, right, wrong, world's not binary, it's like really rich in gray areas. And if there's any place that should know that, that should be the church, and the biggest divide that I am experiencing in my journey and my place on this earth right now is people that accept that
that themselves as a journeyer, and they're open and they're learning, and they identify with being a work in progress, or the ones that are like, nope, no learning for me. Like, none of that. Like, you know, they're just not even willing to question things.
Here's a big shift that I've noticed recently, and and this is just my observation, and this is something I keep saying I'm going to write about more thoroughly on Monday.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest shifts I'm seeing, and actually I see a lot of it in the threads of fundamentalism. So just a little bit of history for those of you who don't know. I'm happy to geek out with you on this over Facebook, so you can find me there. But fundamentalism, like evangelical fundamentalism here in the US, which is the #1 group that's spoken out against Rob Bell, they started in the 1920s. Post World War I, they were trying to formulate meaning. They were trying to do meaning making in light of the Scottish Enlightenment, but also in light of like this really traumatic world event. And so they created these fundamentals of belief. And that was part of what they held on to. And one of the things that kind of came out of that was this idea of inerrancy or infallibility of Scripture. And so this idea that the Bible, as it stands, is the inerrant, infallible Word of God. Now, there were threads of that earlier in history, but really it came to the forefront in the 20s. And so evangelicalism really like just hopped onto that. And one of the biggest critiques I have of the evangelical movement is actually that I believe that they are committing idolatry with the Bible, because the Bible was never meant to be God. It was always meant to point us to God, because the Word is the living Word. The living Word is Jesus. But we've idolatrized it. Idolatrized it. I think that's a word. I don't know. Idolized it. There we go.
I'll back you up on it.
And so this idea of, if the Bible falls apart, then what do we have left of our faith? And what it boils down to is this clinging to this concept of absolute truth, right? This idea of out there in the ether, in the cosmos, in the wherever, there's this ultimate ideal truth, right? And that actually is a very Greek Platonic philosophy. It's not very Hebraic at all. It's not very Jesus at all. If you know anything about Jewish tradition, and a little shout out to my rabbis out there, hey Ami, hey Lizzie, who taught me so much about this Hebraic tradition. But this idea of perfection or truth is really not like the way that Jesus was living at all. But then you get into this idea, which we're shifting into, because we realize that failed us, right? It failed us big time, this idea of absolute truth, absolute reality, because nobody's living up to it, right? There's no one, not one, who lives up to it. And all of a sudden there's been this shift in worldview where instead of valuing truth, we're valuing authenticity and sincerity. And this, like you were talking about, like an honest curiosity and expression and like exploration of journey, this sincerity of like, I am trying to understand reality, not just truth, but reality, like not just what I can think with my head, but what I'm experiencing with my 5 senses, a return to mindfulness, what I'm experiencing in community, because these threads do connect us and they don't make sense and they're not something tangible I can point to. And I'm so excited. The one book I haven't read by Rob Bell yet is called The Zimzum of Love, but this concept of Zimzum, in that when two people are together, there's a third person that erupts between them called the Zimzum. And it's different. Like it's different between every 2 people, and it's unique and it's beautiful. And anyway, so I'm excited to read that book.
I am too. He wrote that with his wife, didn't he? Yeah, I'm excited to read that one. She's too. Great. I believe that. Yeah, I believe that too. I mean, you know, there's like the concept of like, you know, we are the top 5 people that we hang out with, you know, that we I mean, I love the idea of the collective we, or like on my, you know, one of like the top goals of my life is to realize my own relational ripple, like to like experience like these are the people that I'm supposed to be moving through life with, and some people come in and out, and then, you know, I have this idea that like people kind of stay and things really start to happen, and different people come in at different times. My grandmother used to say, people are in your life for a reason, season, lifetime. And I love that saying because that just makes everybody meaningful, every interaction. But Yeah, I lost where I was going with this, but how we're talking about fundamentalism in the Bible and like, yeah.
And truth and sincerity and the shift of how people can cling so hard to this absolute ideal as opposed to understanding or valuing flexibility and the shifting reality that they're experiencing.
Yeah, so this is why I like Rob Bell. Because I feel what he's doing is expanding and opening things up, and like he makes a comment in the documentary about like being in church as a young man and going like, this actually should be the most exciting thing that we're learning about, and it's so boring. Like, why is it so boring? And the openness of realizing, first of all, man wrote the Bible. They're interpretations of a story that was told to another person in a story and stories. It only can be read by having your own experience with it, because if you take any one of those stories at face value, and not remember that someone wrote a story about a story about a story, it could be really destructive. It cannot be taken literally. It has to be more of an open experience to be helpful and not create trauma. So the idea of like someone coming along and saying these are the fundamental rules and abide by them without being curious about what's going on in your life and really seeing if they apply at this time, like, that's nutty to me. It just doesn't seem right to me at all.
And I want to give a little shout out though, like a little.
Okay. We got to give love to our fundamentals too. Yeah, okay.
I do, because I want to be really, really clear. I actually, in my study of Scripture and of the Bible, like I have found the historicity of Scripture to be remarkable. In terms of historical documents, the Bible as it stands today has some pretty remarkable historicity. And historicity just basically means that, like, when you compare it to like an ancient text like Julius Caesar or documents about other people in history, the Bible pretty much ranks top in terms of oldest fragments, best resources. It's pretty cool. What I would encourage those fundamentalists of mine who are inerrant, and I want to say, like, I don't condemn inerrancy or infallibility. All I would encourage people who hold those views to think about is that even if the text itself, in its original translation, because we do translate it, is inerrant or infallible, as readers, we cannot come to a text empty. And I want you to think about it, my fellow evangelicals, my fellow fundamentalists. If you read John 3:16 at a football game, you're going to get a different impression of it than if you're reading it when someone has just died. And that's called hermeneutics. And that's what we bring to the text. Yeah. And so it's always important for us to remember that how we read a verse one day to day changes, and that's the gift of Spirit. But as inerrant as it may be, as infallible as it may be, we are not when we read it. And so we always have to take that into account when we're looking at text, and especially when we're trying to use texts to justify our behaviors or to critique other people's behaviors. We have to remember that we bring ourselves to the text.
Yeah. Well said. You got me all choked up, Katie. Well said. Very good. Wow. So we're getting close to the end of the time. I know, right? We could do this forever. Forever. So is there anything, if you could say, if you could just be encouraging, like if people are in their trauma right now, in their religious trauma, or just feeling like disconnected, from people, from the experience of life, like what comes up for you to put out some words of wisdom and encouragement for people right now, like in this time and space with everything that's going on in the world? Just a little question, by the way.
The first thing I want you to know is that you are loved, that you are treasured, that you are precious, and that your journey is precious. It's important. It's really deeply important work that you're doing. and don't discredit it or diminish it. One of my favorite verses that I actually had made into medallions, it says, "Do not despise these days of small beginnings, because the Lord delights to see the work begin. He delights to see the plumb line in the builder's hand." And what God's talking about that then is building the temple, building these sacred spaces. Don't despise your small beginnings. If it's as simple as, I love Anne Lamott's prayer, help, thanks, wow. Like the simplest prayer you can pray is help, thanks, wow. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to just remember, is that wherever you're starting, just start there. Just choose one thing. Don't worry about becoming a pastor tomorrow. Just choose one. And I think the other thing to say is that there are so many others like you. You're not alone. I promise. I promise you're not alone. And you will find your tribe. You will. It'll take time and it won't be easy, but don't be discouraged.
So thank you. Everything that you're saying, I need to hear, and I feel like it's a gift. And I am so grateful that we had a mutual friend connect us, and you're in a town where one of my favorite human beings on the planet lives, my nephew Kyle, and I get to come see you, and you come here, and I'm just so grateful for our friendship and your guidance and your time today. All right, Katie, that ends the show for today. You guys, if you take the social challenge, you can reach out to me at Love More Now on Twitter or Relate with Steph on Instagram, and we'll post the archive with a bunch of cool links, usually by Thursday of the week, so look for that. And as always, I just want to encourage everybody to relate with more curiosity. See you next week. Bye-bye.